The subject of the night, as you know, is the future of British politics. And so, as the first speaker and as someone who specialises in sort of rather general theory, I thought I'd try and contribute to these discussions by taking something of a long view as to where we've come from and look at some of the trends that might shape British politics in the longer term. I have an argument. That argument is that Brexit and related phenomena, such as Trump's election, have to be understood as effects as well as causes of really very profound and deeply fundamental shifts in both our economy and our politics. And I also want to argue that our politics today is divided in very complex and very fraught ways that will make addressing some of these deeper shifts extremely difficult. So think about it this way. Since 1945, economic and political developments in countries such as ours, such as the UK and the US, have been deeply embedded with processes of globalisation. In the first phase, that took the form of international agreements and partnerships of various kinds, the UN, human rights treaties, NATO, the World Bank, the IMF, and so on. In a second phase, globalisation was focused much more on trade, the standardisation of economic practices, the WTO, the growth in power of multinational businesses, and agreements such as NAFTA, and of course the single European market. And as that global trade grew, national economic regulation shrank. And governments increasingly came to see their job as that of opening their national economies up to global owners and investors. In this country, for example, prime ministers became in a way something like regional personnel officers, ensuring that British human capital was healthy and dedicating themselves to making people individually fit for what Tony Blair thought of as modernisation and David Cameron called the global race. All of that era, that is now over. Globalisation is over. World exports as a percentage of GDP have been declining for several years now. The volume of cross-border financial flows into the US peaked in 2008 and has been declining ever since. The number of trade barriers raised last year was the highest since records began. And at the same time, professionalised governmental bureaucracies, the politicians and lobbyists who meet at Davos, and the traditional media have been defeated by around half of voters in the US and the UK. The economist Danny Roderick coined the term the globalisation trilemma. He said we face an impossible choice between economic globalisation, democracy and national sovereignty. You can have any two of those, he said, but you can't have all three. Remain voters said they wanted globalisation with democracy, but could accept reduced sovereignty. Leavers wanted democracy and national sovereignty, but not globalisation. That's a distinction then, a difference of opinion between 48 and 52% of the population, however, that only scratches the surface of the various divisions that now shape our politics very clearly. Brexit, I think, has made obvious a lot of deep differences and disputes that have been around for a long while, but have now become ever more apparent. And I think from here, as we try and deal with whatever comes after globalisation, UK politics is going to be shaped around them. So let me list briefly 8 of these key divisions that I think are important. You can pick them up in discussion if you want, if you think that I'm right and they're important or interesting, or if you think that I'm wrong. The first of those divisions is the division between rural and urban. Globalisation caused city and country to develop rather different economic interests, and because of the different rhythms and relationships characteristic of each, there was a kind of culture war going on between them. So they vote and they think in markedly different kinds of ways. A second division is that between graduates and non-graduates, people who went to university and people who didn't. That isn't a distinction about the learned and the unlearned. It's a fact about the way that being a graduate gives you access to parts of the labour market from which others are excluded. And that distinction has hardened into different life chances for different groups, as well as suspicion between what are really two cultures. A third fundamental division in our country is between those who possess assets, a home, a pension, significant savings, and those who do not. These groups now have very different interests when it comes to fundamental economic issues like inflation and interest rates. They want and they demand contradictory things. Fourthly, and really obviously, there's a very deep fracture between England and Scotland, which I think Chris will speak about later. Fifthly, there's no avoiding the fact, there's no hiding from it at all, that we're terribly divided over attitudes around race, immigration and foreigners. And the future of British politics is going to involve, without doubt, an even more angry politics around that than we've seen so far. Sixth, and perhaps less obviously, but no less importantly, is a division created by new technology. The digital world gives some new powers to shape public opinion and to access very lucrative digital assets, and it locks out others. My seventh division is that between attitudes, authoritarian and anti-authoritarian. There's now a lot of data showing that a strong predictor of political behaviour today is attitudes to, for example, parenting. Whether someone thinks it's more important for a child to have good manners or curiosity. And that's taken to be an indication of attitudes towards authoritarianism. In some respects, our current politics is still a rather harsh battle between the hippies and the squares. And finally, there is this division between Remain and Leave. And we should not underestimate the extent to which that is now becoming definitive, hardening, and taking on a life of its own. So that's 8 things, 8 fundamental divisions, and I haven't even mentioned the young and the old, the rich and the poor. But the thing is that these divisions don't line up neatly as left and right, Liberal and Tory, and that's part of our problem. Because it means it's harder to organise people into the sorts of interest groups between which agreements on particular things can be brokered. Social, economic and cultural change, allied to new forms of media communication, have fragmented us as a country and enabled new kinds of smaller interest groups to form into political blocs which benefit from exacerbating divisions between us. And I think we don't realise just how far down a rocky road we've come. In our political culture today, positions have hardened, and being uncompromising now seems like a cardinal political virtue. Inconvenient facts are easily dismissed as merely enemy opinions, and expertise is routinely construed as self-interest. In the future, I think our politics will often involve people rather unexpectedly and seemingly suddenly coalescing around specific issues, which have somehow been construed in a way that for a moment at least they appeal across some series of societal divisions. Sometimes these people swarms, that's a phrase I'm trying to popularise, by the way. Sometimes these people swarms will dissipate, sometimes they will crystallise with unpredictable effects. And a new kind of political power will accrue to those who can catch hold of one of these crystals, who can, because of some surprising characteristic or quirk, unpredictably catalyse a reaction in some part of the population and then attract the attention of media producers or persuade someone rich to provide financial backing. All of this begs the question still, though, of what post-globalisation economics and politics will really look like. We don't know, is the answer. But there are a number of things that you can see on offer emerging from what we might call the political avant-garde. PayPal billionaire Peter Thiel, who backed Trump in the US election and is tipped to be involved in the administration somehow, looks forward to a time when we have a state strong enough to resist the demands of minorities so that he can go about his business unimpeded. Paul Mason, financial journalist and Corbynite freelancer in this country, he hopes that technology can usher in a post-capitalist economy based on peer-to-peer collaboration and open source sharing. Aaron Banks, the insurance millionaire who funded Leave.eu, wants to make more use of referenda to give more regular expression to the will of the majority. And there's a few English nationalists around who dream of some kind of autarky, a smaller England with tough borders and self-sufficient economically. The longer-term future of UK politics, I believe, will include contestation around various versions of these kinds of visions, even the ones that today sound bonkers. In the mainstream today, both the government and the leaders of the opposition are trying to develop a position which combines some kind of nationalist protectionism with increased international trade in manufacture. For the government, the emphasis is on meritocracy, the underwriting of foreign firms, and establishing bespoke trade deals. For the opposition, the emphasis is on planned government investment, greater involvement of workers in their workplaces, and stimulation of local economic innovation. To dwell on Labour for a moment, in Labour's favour, perhaps, is the growing political organisation of people working for new economy firms like Uber and Deliveroo, fertile ground for a new politics of rights and conditions at work that we may see develop. Also in Labour's favour is its willingness to embrace some seemingly avant-garde ideas, such as universal basic income. And in momentum, Labour does have some people with understanding of and a capacity to use new forms of media communication. But Labour is in trouble elsewhere, particularly in relation to the divisions that I laid out earlier. It's not popular in the countryside. It's been hated pretty much since the hunting ban. It's reliant on younger graduate voters without assets, out of the game in Scotland, and deeply internally divided about how to speak to English nationalism. Blue Labour on the one hand wants to assert English cultural and religious tradition, while Corbyn supporters are more internationalist and anti-authoritarian, and their division is going to keep playing out for some years. And just this week, as you would have seen, John McDonnell has urged Labour to embrace Brexit, a position which will probably lose the party Remain voting constituencies, such as the one we're in now, and which has already provoked an angry response from some Corbynites. So my overall point then, which I imagine is quite clear, is things are really in flux all the way down. Brexit is not the end of something, it's the beginning. It isn't about a vote in Parliament or a 2-year negotiation. It's about the emergence of a way of doing politics and economics quite different from that which we have had for 60 years or so. And it will, I do keep saying this, it will dominate the adult lives of every single one of our current undergraduates. It's a huge challenge, and I am not, I have to say, convinced that most politicians realise the scale of it or are that up to meeting it. And I know that Whitehall lacks the expertise and experience to manage it. And all that in a context in which our polity is very divided and our political debate too deeply marked by conspiracy theories and by the kind of mistrust and suspicion that I suspect lots of people secretly enjoy too much. And we've lost a lot of the kinds of local, public and civil organisations which can repair some of these divisions, can bind people to each other, integrate them across class, cultural and other differences, and connect them with political decision making. We need to find a way to recreate these. And that, in the end, is one reason for doing events like this, bringing people together so we can share our different kinds of expertise, acknowledge our differences, and I hope be honest about our difficulties. I've been rather negative. My little hope is that the future of UK politics starts here. Thank you.